Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. You know how this works. We take a story, something you might seen in the headlines or a documentary, and we go deeper.
That's right.
And today, we're going back to 2016, Richmond, Virginia, the disappearance of Kesha Jacobs. Now, some of you might remember this case from the news. Maybe you saw Black and Missing, that powerful documentary. But stick with us, because there's always more to the story than what makes the headlines.
Absolutely. And Kesha's case, it's tragically common, right? A young woman vanishes, a mother's left searching, and the trail just goes cold.
Yeah, and the thing about Kesha is, from what we've gathered, her life wasn't what you'd think of as high risk.
Right.
Our sources paint this picture of her as a real homebody, close to her family, her mom, Tony, her brother, Devon, family dinners, cooking together. Kesha, always in her T-shirt and basketball shorts. Not exactly out there partying every night.
No, not at all. And that's what makes what happened on September 26, 2016, all the more shocking.
Yeah, just a regular Monday, right?
It's just an ordinary Monday.
Kesha had a little argument with her boyfriend. Nothing major, though. Told Tony she was heading to a friend's house, even promised to make Davon pancakes the next morning. Sounds totally normal, right?
Totally routine.
And she even texted Tony later that night, "I love you too," after Tony had reminded her to be careful. But then morning comes. No Kesha. Pancakes are definitely off the menu. Tony's calling her, goes straight to voicemail.
Oh,
And that's not like Kesha at all. This is where that mother's intuition, that gut feeling, just kicks in. You know something's wrong.
yeah. That break from routine, it's often the first and sometimes the only warning sign in these cases. It's just heartbreaking because at that point, time is already slipping away.
And Tony, she just wastes a second. She's calling Kesha's friends, no one's seen her. Finally finds out Kesha got a ride to this house in Churchill. Some guy drove her. And this house, this is where things get a little strange.
This is where Otis enters the picture.
Otis, yeah. And Tony meets this guy, and right away, his story is just dot off. Conflicting times about when he saw Kesha last, changing his story. Tony knows he's lying.
Oh, wow.
And she doesn't hesitate. She calls the police right there while she's talking to Otis.
Wow.
They search the house, but Kesha's nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
But Tony's convinced Otis is hiding something. And this is important, right? Because it shows how often families in these situations, they feel like they're not being heard.
Absolutely. They're not being taken seriously.
Exactly.
It's a pattern we see tragically often, especially in cases involving people of color. There's this implicit bias, sometimes unintentional, but it's there. This assumption that the missing person, they're somehow, I don't know, less deserving of that immediate full attention.
Yeah.
Organizations like the Black and Missing Foundation, they're doing incredible work fighting against this, pushing for that urgency right from the start because every second counts.
Every second does count. And in Kesha's case, there's another layer to this whole thing.
Yeah.
The media. A local reporter, Mark Robinson, he lived in the same neighborhood, and he picked up on the story.
Oh, okay.
But even he, a journalist, he had trouble getting straight answers from the police. And, that lack of transparency, it just fuels rumors and speculation. And sometimes that can actually hurt the investigation.
No, absolutely. It creates this awful cycle. The family's desperate, the police aren't saying much, the media is trying to fill the gaps, and it's just chaos. And at the center of it all is a family who just wants to know what happened to their loved one.
And for Tony, this already impossible situation, it gets worse.
Yeah.
Just a few months after Kesha vanishes, her son, Davon, he's shot and killed. Can you even imagine?
It's unimaginable.
One child gone, the other's still missing.
And then to add to the injustice, the man convicted in Davon's case, he gets a plea deal, serves only 5 years. Tony's feeling like the system's failed her, not once, but twice. So it's no wonder she becomes even more determined to find out what happened to Kesha.
Yeah, and she never gives up believing Kesha's out there alive.
Yeah.
Especially after she starts getting these weird phone calls.
Phone calls.
Sometimes the caller doesn't say anything, just silence. Other times she hears voices in the background like they're talking to someone else. Chilling stuff.
That's really creepy.
And Tony, she starts to believe Kesha was trafficked. Now, I know that might sound like a reach to some people, but the sad reality is young women, especially young women of color, they're so vulnerable to this.
Yeah.
And remember, at this point, it's been years, no real leads in the case. And then, boom, a man named Otis Tucker confesses to being involved in Kesha's disappearance. But here's the kicker. Otis Tucker. He's the same Otis that Tony confronted at that house all those years ago.
Wait, are you serious?
Yeah.
The same guy.
Same guy. He's now serving life for a completely different murder down in Florida. And out of nowhere, he says he knows what happened to Kesha. And there's always a but, right?
Oh, no.
There's some legal agreement that prevents him from being charged in connection with Kesha's case.
Oh, my goodness.
So we've got this guy, Otis, already locked up, confesses, but can't be touched. It's mind-boggling, the frustration Tony must felt.
It is. It's like a victory and a defeat all at once. You finally get some truth, but no real justice.
Exactly. And what did Otis actually say happened? Did he give any details about Kesha?
He admitted to getting rid of Kesha's body, but he wouldn't say where.
Oh, wow.
Claimed he didn't kill her, just helped cover it up.
Yeah.
But I mean, who knows what to believe with a guy like this?
Right.
He's already serving life for murder. Doesn't exactly scream reliable source.
No, not at all. It's like something out of a crime novel. All these tangled threads, this feeling there's a bigger picture no one's quite grasping.
And that's what's so compelling, but also disturbing about these cases, right? You see these cracks in the system, these patterns repeating themselves. Like Otis, he fits a certain profile, preying on the vulnerable, manipulating situations.
Yeah. What about the trafficking angle, though? Tony was so sure that's what happened to Kesha. Did Otis shed any light on that?
He didn't, never mention trafficking. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a factor. We know these networks, they thrive in secrecy. They target young women, often women of color, who society tends to overlook.
It's terrifying.
It really is. It's entirely possible Kesha got caught up in something like that, and Otis was just a small part of it.
Makes you think, if the police had taken Tony seriously back then, really dug into Otis, could things have been different?
That's the question that lingers in so many of these cases. Could earlier action have saved a life? We'll never know for sure, but it underlines how crucial it is to shift how we handle missing persons investigations.
Right. It shouldn't be on the family to fight for every scrap of information, to beg to be heard. The system needs to prioritize these cases, recognize the urgency, especially when there are warning signs like Tony saw with Otis.
Exactly. We need to be proactive, not reactive. Create a society where young women like Kesha are less vulnerable in the first place. And that means tackling the root causes: poverty, lack of opportunity, all those things that make someone susceptible to exploitation.
It's a tough conversation.
It is.
But a necessary one. We can't keep losing these young lives and just accept it as the norm.
Absolutely. And part of that is seeing these victims as people, not just names on a poster. Kesha was a daughter, a sister, a young woman with dreams. Her story deserves to be more than a statistic. It should be a call to action.
Absolutely. So where does this leave Tony? Does Otis's confession bring any peace, or is it just another layer of pain?
It's probably a mix of both, honestly. In her statements, she talks about relief that some of the mystery is gone, but heartbreak that her fears were confirmed.
And the fact that Kesha's remains are still out there, that has to be so heavy to carry. No closure, no proper goodbye.
It is. It adds another dimension to the grieving process. There's no grave to visit, no finality. Just this emptiness where Kesha should be.
It's a reminder that these cases, they don't end neatly with a confession or an arrest. The families are left to pick up the pieces, live with the what-ifs.
And yet Tony, with everything she's gone through, she's become an advocate for other families of the missing.
Wow.
Turned her personal tragedy into a force for change, pushing for more accountability from law enforcement, making sure these stories don't fade away.
She's incredible. And her story, as awful as it is, it gives us a sliver of hope, right?
Yeah.
Shows the strength of a mother's love, the power of speaking up, and how even in the darkest moments, something good can emerge.
Exactly. Kesha's case may be closed.
Right.
But the fight for a system that truly protects the vulnerable, that fight goes on.
And that's a fight we can all join. By listening, by raising awareness, by demanding better from those in power. It's how we honor Kesha's memory and hopefully prevent more tragedies like hers. It's easy to get lost in the details, the legal stuff, the search for answers. But we can't forget, at the heart of it, this is about a person, a young woman whose life was stolen.
Absolutely. And there are so many other Keshas out there. Their faces on posters, families still searching. Their stories matter.
One thing that stuck with me, Kesha could easily have been dismissed as a runaway. Young woman, maybe some trouble at home, disappears with a guy. But Tony, she wouldn't let that happen.
That's huge. Challenging those assumptions, the stereotypes that cling to these cases. Because the truth is, there's no simple explanation. Every case is its own story.
Right. And what about that documentary, Black and Missing? We haven't really touched on that, but it definitely brought more attention to Kesha's story. Do you think it helped, or did it make things harder?
It's tough to say, honestly. Documentaries, they can be so powerful, right? They shed light on cases that might have been ignored. They put pressure on the police, get the community involved. But there's also a risk, of sensationalizing things,
Mm.
focusing on the drama instead of the facts.
And with Kesha, there was a lot of speculation, a lot of focus on certain people in her life.
Hmm.
Did that end up being more of a distraction, or did it lead to anything useful?
Hard to say for sure, but I think it's important to acknowledge the media, whether it's news or documentaries, they shape how we see these cases. And that has an impact on how investigations unfold, how families are treated, the whole idea of justice.
Yeah, that's a lot of weight on their shoulders. It makes you wonder, how do we make sure these stories are told the right way,
Mhm.
with respect for the victims and their families?
That's the challenge, especially with all these true crime shows and podcasts popping up. It's about finding a balance, telling a gripping story, but never forgetting the real human lives at the center.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Kesha's case, what do you think are the most important things to remember?
For me, it's that never giving up hope. Tony, she never stopped fighting for Keisha, even when everyone told her to let go. And that determination, that refusal to accept the unknown, it ultimately led to some answers, even if they weren't the ones she was hoping for.
It's a reminder that we all have a part to play, right? If something seems off, speak up. Support organizations like Black and Missing. They're doing amazing work to bring people home. And most importantly, remember the victims. Say their names, keep their stories alive.
That's it. Let's honor Keisha by creating a world where stories like hers are less and less common.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll be back soon with another story, another look into a complex issue. Until then, stay curious, keep learning, and stay engaged.